Hello,
Hello, everybody,
and
and welcome back
to
to
another episode of
This is Absurd. My name is Tarek.
And my name is Arturo Rolero.
So, basically, we're really getting to the swing of things here back in Austin. School has been going on for a week and a half ish now. Labor Day weekend. I really am starting to feel back in school. Like it actually feels things are going. Things are like I don't know, actually in classes now. I'm kind of liking it. I don't know how you feel about it, but I enjoy the structure of school more.
I really enjoy my professors. I have really good professors for my MIS classes, especially, but as well for my business rhetoric class, my accounting class. And I'm sure that my statistics professor is good as well. The only problem is that it's hard for me to focus in that class because that's a live video stream. So I can't put myself in the mentality of it being a face-to-face class.
Yeah, that's how my Black Power movement class is. Well, let me tell you something about that class. It's every time the professor says something that's like woke or like eye opening. There's like girls in the chat who always like just type period and like people like do the upwards emoji to like emphasize that like yeah, like, go girl, we agree with you. And it gets heated in there sometimes. Like this one guy, Nicholas, I guess is his name, was I don't know, I guess being kind of a troll. Like
What was he doing?
so there was one point where like the professor said something about how if you like black women and sometimes their names like turn off employers, and he said like like comment in the chat if like you feel like your name would turn off employers, and Nicholas was like, yeah, I feel like I would get that, and people blew up on him, and then there was like a conversation about do police lives matter. And he said, yeah, and everyone like continually like just came after him. He's like, that's a terrible opinion. Like you should just like get out of here. And someone said, is there a way to boot someone out of the
Oh my
Zoom?
God.
I know. And then the group me afterwards was even more vicious.
I wish that it was open to dialogue though, like that the professor would be able to respond to Nicholas, and Nicholas, as much of a troll that he was being, there would just be a back and forth between him and the professor because it's basically the way that the video stream works is there's a chat room, and in the chat room you submit your questions. Then there's some breaks for Q&A sessions. This is what happens in my stats class too, where the TAs read off questions that are brought up in the chat. And you brought up a very valid point, and I think that type of question is a great question to have.
Oh, you want me to explain it?
Yeah, to ask.
Yeah, and I mean, it was, but I also get why he maybe dismissed it. Like, I think it would have been a better question if I went to his office hours. But what I asked, and it was on the first day, so I get why, like, me doing that on the first day also wasn't a great thing. But he basically said, like, posed the idea, what comes first, racism or slavery? Like, do you enslave someone and then you justify it afterwards with racism? Or are you racist first and you enslave populations that you're racist towards? I was like, oh, this is interesting. And I'm a big Roman history buff, and that history is full of enslaving
Right.
barbaric tribes or populations, right? And so I just wanted to like draw a parallel, not because I wanted to justify the situation in which he was talking about. That would have been terrible. No. Usually when you draw a parallel to another historical event that had similar implications, i.e. slavery, you can learn a little bit about each event from drawing that connection. I mean, that's how I have always thought, right?
Right. No, it makes complete sense.
And so I asked him, like, what parallels can be drawn, for example, with the Romans, and they used to enslave people. Were they racist, or was it a kind of racism that was more so like civilized versus barbarism? You know, something like that. And I asked that question. One of the TAs started reading it off, and he just, like, cut her off. He's like, no, that's not what we're talking about. You know, that doesn't justify African enslavement. I was like, what?
That's
That's not what I meant.
which is the reason why I guess I became disillusioned after you explained that part to me, is that I would love for someone to argue the opposite side, right? That basically what you're saying, what you, at least the conclusion that I would have arrived to, is that slavery came before racism,
Hmm.
right? But if his thoughts were different and he's a professor, right, I would love for him to explain why his belief is that racism comes before slavery.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, he didn't really even explain where his stance was on it. He just kind of left it for food for thought type thing, and then just kind of moved on to lecture itself. And I mean, if there's anyone who knows what he's talking about when it comes to the history of slavery in America and Black Power movement, it's him. That's why I just really would have liked him to give his take on that.
Right. Which makes complete sense.
But it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, and I don't think like anyone else in that class. I mean, or at least from the people who are most vocal in the chat, at least, are curious to know either. Right? They're too busy like just hyping each other up.
Man, I wonder how like that would have been as an in-person class. Maybe
dirty
you wouldn't
looks.
have had the troll like Nico,
Yeah.
because there's that sense of anonymity when you're behind the screen.
Well, that's the thing. The people who are also coming after him, I don't think they would have done that either in person. Because same thing, the anonymity. Like, they were all talking about how they need to just like boot this guy, get this guy out of here. Like, why do you want to be in here? This is obvious. Like, the class is called Black Power Movement, right? Your thoughts are like dangerous for like black students in this class. Not dangerous, but like hurtful, whatever. But I don't think either one of those situations would have happened in person, and that's the big thing that comes out of like being able to sit behind a laptop and get that like dopamine rush from typing period exclamation point, and like having everyone like clap emoji and point upwards, like as in
Yeah.
like, yeah, you go girl.
Unless if we really are, like, society is to the point where students go into an auditorium, into a lecture hall with this professor, because it's a big class, right?
Oh yeah, massive class.
Yeah, go into this lecture hall or auditorium with this professor, and, it's now him more being a preacher to the audience, and there's a bunch of applause and cheering, which would have been another interesting thing to see if that were to occur.
Well, I used to hear, like, the reason why I took his class in the first place is because I heard he was a great lecturer. And so I think he already had that effect to a certain extent, right? Like, he had a certain energy and passion when it came to talking about that subject, that he had a sort of preacher-like effect. So, and the only problem with those kind of lecturers is that sometimes they're not the most respondent to questions, or even if they are respondent to questions, and I think he is, but they only answer like, they take the question and they kind of frame the question in their own way. So even if you asked a certain question, that they might only answer parts of the question that they felt were important, right? They wouldn't touch upon everything.
And then, well, it's just because there's that, what was it, an article that you were telling me?
The
saying,
free speech
the free
article?
speech article.
I was about to bring that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What exactly was it? It was like free speech.
So historically, college campuses have always been about free speech, advocating free speech. And they were specifically talking about John Stuart Mill, who advocated for absolute free speech. He said that a heretic or someone with kind of malicious ideas, that if you gave them the opportunity to have their platform speak, that public opinion in itself would be able to notice the fact that they are crazy, that their ideas don't make sense, that their ideas or it's coming from a heretic, whatever. But it also, in the slim chance, gives the opportunity, like, oh, is that heretic actually right? Like, is he actually onto something? But the process of seeing that person spouting these crazy ideas also strengthens the better opinion, not the correct opinion, but the better opinion, or the prevailing opinion at the time. So this is supposed to be what ideally happens in the college setting, right? You give platforms to people to share their ideas, and once the ideas are floating about, people can see if they're actually like have something to it, have some merit, or if just they're complete BS. But the article was arguing that this process in itself has led to the fact that we are not willing to get behind one idea because now every idea is refutable.
Right.
So
Right.
like
So like there needs to be a sense of objectivity. That everything with so much free speech, everything becomes relative truths. Right.
yes, yeah, I think
There's
that's a
no
good way to put it.
absolute truth. So there's no this is the right way. Like
Mhm.
regardless of what we do, we know that this is the correct way to move forward.
Right, and I think the way you put it, like everything is relative, like there's only relative truths, and not necessarily that there should be objective truth. It's just that when you give everyone a platform, or when you're less wary as to what lecturer is having a massive like class and what exactly ideas they're espousing, we need to be a little bit more careful in who is going up there and what ideas they're shouting towards like these young freshmen who are sort of more absorbent, or ready to
Yeah.
absorb new ideas. So if you have like your freshman year professor in your government 310 class denouncing democracy, saying that democracy is inherently racist, that the 1619 project is correct, and
Yeah. Or something. It would just preaching to the audience. Really, I think it comes to a point of immediate gratification. You give the audience some feel of immediate gratification that tugs to the strings of the heart, right? And that is a very persuasive speaker. You get a persuasive speaker rather than an educative speaker.
sure. Yeah, it's really easy to rile up a crowd when you're like going on a rant about something and saying that the system has so many flaws and pointing it out and getting these like oohs and gasps and all that kind of stuff going on, and then you have these students like leaving with the feeling like, oh, let me go tell my roommate about this. This is crazy. I can't believe I didn't know this about American politics.
Exactly.
And sure, yeah, I mean a lot of things
Especially
can
if
be
you're
eye-opening.
like espousing these ideas to like young adults
Yeah.
like us,
Yeah.
whose minds are still open to new thoughts.
And also, I mean, if this is like your first year and you see a professor, this person's an authority figure to you.
He is. They are. I should
of
say.
whatever. Like, if we're going with the government class, like this person is an expert in government, and what he's saying, I mean, has to be largely true or a really good interpretation that I missed or that has been hidden from me. And I think that's another problem that, like, I think college students should be allowed to deal and interact with different ideas, and they should be able to develop the skills to, like, I don't know, evaluate them on their own merit. But also, it's difficult to do that if you've never done that before, right? And so
Right.
that's why I agreed with the article that I read that in large part, the problem may have originated with advocating too much free speech, in the sense that we were just giving any professor, any lecturer, a platform or stance, even if their ideas were the ones that were like sowing the seeds for more radical ideology.
Do you think this is where an authoritative regime, a dictatorship, even a monarchy, which is something that I go on the r/monarchism subreddit quite a bit. And they have very funny memes, but where they are stronger because you have this central figure, and they are saying this is the truth. This is the way we're gonna go. This is the objective truth. Do you get what I'm saying?
No, I 100% get what you're saying. Actually, there was in War and Peace, Tolstoy, like authoritative falsehood. I think when he was writing, like sometimes he would pull back and write a little bit more like he was writing a political or philosophical treatise in his in War and Peace, and he coined the term authoritative falsehood to describe like how Napoleon, when he would talk about like his victory or his battle or whatever, like everything, all the events that occurred, just coming straight from his genius, right? And so when you see the authoritative falsehood, or if you've seen a figure speaking falsely, but they have this like authority to them, this certain power behind their word, then they can easily say false things that, the public will swallow, right? And I think that in large part is a parallel to like Donald Trump and his base. his authoritative falsehood.
But is that a bad thing though?
It's
It can
I
fall
think it's a
into the
bad thing.
wrong hands.
Yeah, depending on the cause. I think like why, how is the leader using his authoritative falsehood? Like, is he blatantly lying to the public about, say, a crisis in his country, or about a population in his country that he's painting as the scapegoat, like the Jews or the Arabs, or something like that. Like, say, like he's just using his authority to incite violence or protect himself, really, in his regime. I think that's where it can go wrong, but I don't know where it can go right. Where do you think it can go right?
I think that if you have or if you had the perfect leader, and I guess to us, we each have our own idea of a perfect leader with our own ideals of what the world is, because what's the saying, like one man's utopia is another,
Mantel, yeah.
it's another man's hell. So having that leader, yeah, I don't think it's bad for the Trump base to support Trump, or that okay, this is going to be I how do I say this? I think
Yeah, how do you come back from that one?
if you want the world to go in a specific direction, it goes back to having a preacher type professor, lecturer that is telling you the things you want to hear. And I don't think it's a bad thing to hear those things. You get what I'm saying?
So, but then that just goes back to, is the vision or the future that you're having, that the preacher or lecturer or authoritative figure is guiding the listeners or audience or country towards, is the vision a good thing? But once you're wrapped up in the sort of rhetoric and voice of the speaker, it's hard for you to step back and evaluate his vision.
Yeah, but you're hearing the things you want to hear, if that makes sense. Maybe it's different if you have no ideas and go into this setting with the speaker and he persuades you to start believing in a certain way. But if you are coming from a place where nothing has worked for you and you do feel that the system is against you, I don't think it's a bad thing to hear someone point that out, and you are hearing what you want to hear. You're not alone. And I think I think the same way that you do. Yes, this can lead to terrible things, right? But I don't think it's a bad thing to hear what you want to hear. Right, it's a bit tough for me to
It just sounds like a
define
pure
what
confirmation bias. Then, like, wanting to hear things that you want to hear is just like a confirmation bias. And just the tricky thing is like, what you're confirming true or not? And I know what you're saying is that that's not necessarily what you're trying to address, whether what you're trying to hear and that person is confirming is true or not. But that's my shtick for me. Like, it's hard to make a sort of value judgment about, is it good or not to have this kind of speaker, without also judging what the speaker is confirming for the listener.
it's just hard for me to not advocate for complete free speech, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And with absolute free speech, you're going to have these preachers that are telling you what you want to hear, right? These demagogues. And like I said, I don't really think that's a bad thing. Or maybe to me, what I'm saying is that I'm willing to accept that in order to have absolute free speech. Because once you cross the line and start taking away someone's right to speak and their opinions, it becomes a very, very slippery slope.
I agree there. No, I do agree there. I think just what the writer of that article was saying is that we need to evaluate the sort of speakers and professors that are having these platforms to share their opinion. Like, what exactly are they teaching? Is what they're teaching also like supported by other, not his? Okay, yeah, no, I it's hard to start like now defining like what would be the sort of threshold for a
Yeah,
speaker to still
because
have his
once
platform.
if you say that, all right, well, this person can no longer have the platform, you are setting a mark and you're saying, all right, free speech in quotations, is going to be defined for these set of values. After that, it just doesn't exist.
Okay.
But what is that point? Because you set the marker here, but it's still a very abstract concept, right? The marker might have been somewhere else, or that's what someone might think that is trying to, I guess, deplatform more speakers, saying, well, we didn't go far enough. He was just far enough into the absolute free speech. He was just one of the people that was so far out there that we knew this guy doesn't deserve a platform, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes
And then
sense.
it just goes closer and closer. It's a very slippery slope, so it's hard for me to like I understand that point, that position, and that's why I brought up that maybe this is like where dictatorships, authoritarian regimes, absolute monarchies that I don't really think exist much now. But where they, I guess, excel in finding the objective truth for the country.
Plus censorship, don't let any counter ideas counter to what the monarchy's objective truth.
Right, because
Yeah.
it's wrong.
Yeah. Actually, that's like why, like the Arab Spring back in like 2011, 2012, whatever, was really able to, or one of the reasons why it sort of precipitated was because of social media. Like it was a lot harder to censor that, and so you were having, like now you could put on in the same way like police brutality here in the United States. There you could now put like things on the internet of like the regime's brutality that you never heard about in the news or the newspaper or whatever, now all over the internet. And there was more communication, there was more sharing, more sharing of ideas and events and stuff like that. And so that is the big thing, is that these authoritarian regimes are able to hold on to an objective truth as long as they prevent
And
sort
like that's beautiful. That's amazing that this stuff was able to be exposed.
yeah.
But once the censorship is infiltrated or has infiltrated that aspect of the internet, right? What is going to stop us from right now? It is exposing the bad things in this country or in other countries, instances of violence that are being covered up. Yes, that is what it's exposing now. But what will stop from that? What is stopping that from then turning into some sort of propaganda?
Well, yeah, isn't that the problem with, or isn't that what happens in China? Like it's very, very limited as to what they can use the internet for, or like they
Yeah.
can't. It's very much censored. So
But I'm saying like once censorship infiltrates, censorship can then transform into a propaganda machine. That it is allowing free speech, but instead you are only putting out things that are going to sway the public opinion, the masses of some country into some chaos. And I think this is like where I guess
I feel like it's where the analytics come in. Like you don't even necessarily have to make propaganda. You just rather need to use your sort of apparatus of control to now alter what the citizens are seeing based on their like data and their preferences, and like show them things that make them appreciate or like the regime more, and also just use that data to also keep them away from seeing things that they would dislike about the regime.
Like I think that's censorship in a different light, if that makes sense.
Sure. No, that makes
Propaganda is
sense.
just censorship online in a different light.
I feel like propaganda is
In general, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I feel like propaganda in general is like, for example, if like there was a state newspaper or state-owned newspaper and they were just pumping out great things about X country and how great they are, and anyone had the ability to see it, whereas like propaganda on that more, I don't know, I guess lower level or lower noticeability level in terms of like analytics and data and like, you know, subvertly making you see things that the government wants you to see.
It's more backroom.
More
stuff.
backroom.
Yeah, you're not going to really find this. You're not going to find the traces of it. You don't know this is happening to you. There's no salesperson trying to give you this. You're already being handed. Like, this is the platter he is serving that item to you with, and you're not going to buy the item, but you still have the platter. Or I don't know. I try to come up with a good analogy, but
Yeah, I got
Yeah.
lost with it, but it is okay. Yeah, that is interesting though.
okay. The salesperson comes to your house. You don't need to buy what he's selling, but it is the house that is actually making you believe one way. And that's the backroom stuff. You don't know that it's happening, but it's in your house already.
Okay. Oh, okay. So the salesperson's kind of like a guise to the information that's being fed to you.
Yeah, but
like they think that the government is trying to, or whoever the source of information is trying to get them to accept it through the salesperson, but rather it's already in their house. The salesperson's just like a distractor.
Yeah, it's where you're living in.
Yeah.
Like-
Yeah. No, I mean that makes sense.
That's a better analogy.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah.
Another aspect of absolute free speech. For instance, if I was in charge, I wouldn't allow people to write stupid things, right? Just completely idiotic. But we do have the blessing of stupid people also having a voice, or even smart people saying stupid things. And in case you don't know, I'm talking about my roommate at this time because you did something as a smart person very stupid, but it was funny. It was very funny.
Yeah. It was a semi joke. It was largely a joke from the get go, but then I don't know. Whatever the conclusion was, I probably would have been fine either way. But what happened is that before school started, the Daily Texan, which is UT's paper, had applications for their columnist position, and I was looking at like sample columns, and like you would think that a large newspaper, I mean, regardless if they're on UT or not, yeah, they would write opinion articles about UT, campus life, whatever, but they'd also probably tackle other issues, right? No. Very limited, very narrow, talking about largely social justice on campus.
And they're one of the larger newspaper organizations for a university
Right.
in the country.
Right. So yeah, it was surprisingly limited. So I don't know, me and Arturo were kind of chatting it up when I was thinking about like just sending in an article as a joke, and he said,
I was washing dishes, and I think it's because you brought up squirrels, right? And
No, we were talking about this other set of studies called the grievance studies that was supposed to show how ridiculous certain aspects of academia are. And it was an article about gay dogs.
right, gay dogs, and we were thinking about trying to relate that to aspects of campus. And we thought, okay, well, there are a lot of squirrels on campus. And then I'm washing dishes, and I think, okay, let's think about it. We have albino squirrels. What can we say about the albino squirrel? And then it came to me. I said, Tarek, what can the albino squirrel teach us about race relations in the United States?
And I heard that, and I sat for a little bit. I'm like, I could probably write some BS about this, and which I did. I essentially said that the albino squirrels, or the reverence that students hold for the albino squirrels, is an indication of the preference for whiteness in America.
Yeah.
I said something along the lines of like, although biologists just see it as a genetic abnormality, UT students add a special meaning to it. And I just tied it into how American culture prefers whiteness over anything else, and how whiteness equates to being better, and how this is like very important for us to reevaluate other UT traditions because they could have the same underlying sort of messages that
It was
are very harmful.
it was hilarious. It was hilarious, and I did tell you that if you did get the position, which
I didn't, yeah.
you didn't.
Which I think is makes me a little happy that perhaps that they saw that and were like a little like, is he serious?
Yeah, that's. I was gonna say that. I'm. If you did get the position, then I would have, kind of been upset at the publication for accepting you to the position because of the article
Yeah.
that you wrote as a joke article as well.
In that like one afternoon.
But I'm glad that we the Daily Texan is still strong.
Yeah.
Right? It's not bad.
Watch me send in like the same article like I don't know a year from now, and they're like applauding it. I was like, oh my god, this is the best piece of scholarship we've seen in years. Just give it a year. Just give it a year. Yeah, I'm glad that was the conclusion, but still, I just thought that's kind of funny because I could easily see someone seriously writing about that. You know?
No, when you brought it up, sure there would probably be more evidence about us in the United States valuing whiteness because it was a relatively short article.
Yeah,
right?
very short.
It was very short. You could bring up like a whole bunch of examples and advertisements or I don't know, just other aspects of American culture, and I can see how that could become an academic study
Oh yeah.
easily.
Yeah, and it would be so easy to also conduct this study because we have to decolonize the scientific method, so we could just collect the data however we please. that has always been one of the craziest things I've ever seen is decolonizing the scientific method. Like, what does that even mean?
I don't even know.
Because just because perhaps racist people have used the scientific method in the past, or maybe people who even created it were not the fans of darker colored people, it doesn't mean that the method itself is inherently racist. I don't know what would make the method racist.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I do not know. But that's like I have heard a bit about the like removing of Eurocentrism in the United States education.
That's a little crazy too because like that's
Like for like K through 12 schools.
well yeah, because that's very crazy because that's where we sort of came from, like where the United States originated, both in thought and in migration, population migration.
Yeah. And I mean I have seen it more recently along with the 1619 project, right? Because you do have African slaves who came to the United States. But if we want to go into like the history of why we govern the way we govern, it all stems from Europe. You cannot deny that.
No, yeah, the philosophy behind a lot of the reasons why we, whether it's Montesquieu and separating the branches or Locke and the ideas we got from him. I mean, that's where the Constitution was heavily influenced by. So why would we not teach it? Is
And
the better
even
question.
then, why? So you need to know, why did the settlers from the Plymouth colony go? Well, they were escaping religious persecution in Europe, right? Like you need to know this stuff.
Yeah.
These,
It'd be funny if
I
they started
just
teaching
don't-
like Eastern culture and Eastern history to like I don't know, like middle schoolers, and it just has no applicability to
to
living
the
in the
settlers, to the colonies.
Yeah, if you try teaching seventh graders from Cleveland, Texas, like the history of ancient China and their religions, I mean, it's gonna go over their head even more so than what's already going over their head in terms of U.S. history.
But I guess this is the problem that we get to, because there were multiple people that lived in the United States, multiple ethnic groups, cultures, who experienced different histories, you could say, right? And how do we define really a history history curriculum that would be applicable to
Like just U.S. students, like K
yeah
through 12.
yeah U.S. students.
One thing I do think is like surprisingly overlooked is the history of like African Americans post Civil War and certain aspects and certain laws, legislation, things that were done to prevent them from growing as a kind of socioeconomic group. But at the same time, it's not like you need to make that the sole focus of American history. I think it just needs to be more willing to incorporate parts of the history of the United States that are uglier, but that doesn't necessarily mean tearing down, say, the value of the American Revolution and making the American Revolution the way that the 1619 Project framed it as us rebelling from from England because we wanted to protect our slaves. Like that's ridiculous. That's I mean, that just would make it seem then that the foundation of the Constitution and the ideas in the Constitution are replaced now with wanting to protect slaves or protect the institution of slavery, not necessarily, separation of powers and suffrage and
The document that it is for inspiring other constitutions around the world.
right, exactly. I mean that too. So
And I think maybe once you get to the Civil War, that is one American history, like from the colonizers, from the colonies to the Civil War is one American history. And I think you can teach that. Of course, you can teach this to everybody, but I don't think you really need to break that part up. Once you get to post-Civil War and to the present, I feel that we can break it up into two different histories or two different types of America. And what I'm saying is that there could be a domestic U.S. history and a foreign affairs U.S. history, because in the 20th century, a large part of the 20th century is the Cold War.
mm-hmm.
And then you go before that, it's World War II. And even before that, it's World War I. Right?
Even a little bit before that, Spanish American, like it is a large part of the United States growing into a global power.
Exactly. And they're involved in more, well, I guess, global affairs, foreign affairs. And that is a different history than the domestic history. But because it's so much information, it is hard, too, to teach all of this.
It is. It is a challenge. Teach all of it and teach it accurately and teach it in a way that isn't like overwhelming. So it is tough to design a curriculum like that, but it needs to be, I guess, worked on more, because history is very, very important, as I like to say often.
I mean, you would be a strong advocate for teaching the history of the ancients, right?
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Like when you said moving away from a Eurocentric view, and I mean the classics that I think about usually are ancient Rome and ancient Greece, which are still Eurocentric. But also I think that moving to the older empires of from the Mesopotamian region as well is also very important. Tracing back the lineage of humanity and where the, I guess, first major innovations were made in terms of like political theory, politics in general, philosophy, rhetoric, those kind of things all originate from that region. So I think there's an importance there, but then it's hard to throw that on top of what you already need to learn about the complicated nature of American history.
Yeah, and even then, it'd be hard to go before the ancient Greeks, because at that point, we know so much about Athens because Athens wrote stuff down.
Yeah, Herodotus has his histories of the Persian War, and you get his perspective, but not so much. Like you get his perspective of the Persians, but not necessarily the Persians writing about their own history. And you get other, texts here and there, but there's not really a great history written of the time before ancient Greece. Herodotus is actually considered the father of history, so that's a big problem as well. Yeah.
I think that is something that we can, hopefully strive for, is to achieve that perfect curricula, whatever it may be, right? And that's going to be very hard. We're probably going to have a lot of ups and downs, and where we become way too prideful in our country and ignore all the issues to just becoming super depressed about our history.
Yeah. Ebbs and flows.
Yeah, ebbs and flows, until we find a curricula that is able to, I guess,
encompass all of the nuances of American history.
Right, or
the important nuances.
Yeah.
Not all of them. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to another episode of This Is Absurd.
All right. See y'all later.
Goodbye.
Jucând